this game could get weird, and I think this game is interesting, is because Nebraska's hot right now. They actually have put themselves in a much better position in the Big Ten, where now they're fighting for something. I think they have a chance. I'm not saying they're going to be a tournament team, but I think they definitely have more of a chance than they did a couple weeks ago. And the biggest reason why is they're starting to win games. Before, like I talked about with some of the iffy scores, they've been up and down. It was weird all year. But you look at Nebraska in their last 1, 2, 3, 4 games, ever since they got smacked by Wisconsin on the road 83-55, this Nebraska team has been really good, actually. In the Big Ten, they've won 4 straight games against 4 pretty good teams in the Big Ten. At least I would say 3 of these teams are definitely pretty solid in the Big Ten. They beat Illinois 80-74 in a huge game for Nebraska. They beat Oregon 77-71 a couple weeks ago on February 2nd, and then they beat Washington 86-72, a Washington team that I don't think is great. I think that's the one kind of win where you're like, okay, I think that's a team they should beat. But they also beat an Ohio State team that's been similar, kind of where they've been up and down as well. But that's definitely a good, solid Ohio State team, an Ohio State team that just beat us. So they have won 4 straight, and that's the biggest reason why I think this game could get weird. And maybe to use better language, I mean, I think Maryland should win the game. I think Maryland's technically the better team. But when you look at what Nebraska has done recently, they've been hot. And whenever a team gets hot in basketball, I mean, we've seen it with the Maryland team. Maryland has been pretty hot over the last month or so. And whenever a team gets hot in basketball, that can be a tough team to beat. That can be a tough team to play against. That can be a tough win to get when a team is hot. When a team is cold and things aren't going as well, in college basketball, it's a lot easier. But when a team is playing like Nebraska, where they've won 4 straight Big Ten games, they're fighting for their lives, they want to put themselves in position to potentially be in the tournament, it can be tough to win that type of game. And when you actually look at the spread, it's basically a pick 'em, but Nebraska is favored by a point, depending on where you look. I think 1.5 actually. So this is a game where I think I have a good feeling about it, and I feel like Maryland's the better team on paper. But the fact that Nebraska's hot, I think, is something that is really a big storyline from this game. They've won 4 straight. They're kind of where we were a couple weeks ago, or not a week ago, I guess you would say about a week ago, before we took that loss to Ohio State, even though we got another one back against Rutgers. It's kind of similar to where we were at before. So I do think that part of it is interesting. And then also, Maryland has had trouble winning games on the road. We know that's just how it's been under Kevin Willard. We're really good at home, and we've gotten better, it feels like, on the road, especially on that win streak that Maryland basketball went on, and we were able to get some big-time wins, 2 really big wins on the road. But overall, it hasn't been easy for us to win games on the road in general, and that's just the way sports are. If you're going to play away at Nebraska, it's going to be a lot tougher than playing them at home. And when you guys remember, we already played this Nebraska team once. And when we played them originally, it was at home in our own place. I felt good about it. I think I felt good because Maryland was playing at home, and we know Maryland basketball plays a lot better at home, and they're a lot more effective at home. And that was a game that I thought we should have won a little bit easier than we actually did. I felt like we let them back in the game late, but we still ended up winning the game 66-69. But now you flip this script and you say, okay, that was when Nebraska was playing poor. Like, they weren't great then. They weren't winning a ton of games. They weren't putting themselves in the best position. They weren't doing things how Nebraska basketball wanted to do it. And so that was a shaky time for them, and we ended up beating them by 3. Now you switch and you say, okay, Nebraska's hot. They play at home. And that's why I think this game could get a little bit weird. Now, it's a huge game for Nebraska as well. They're still fighting. I don't know exactly what their tournament's chances look like, but they've won 4 straight Big Ten games. If they get on a roll and keep winning, they definitely, there's no reason why I don't think they wouldn't be able to get in. If you said that a couple weeks ago, I think Nebraska fans would tell you, nah, we're not a tournament team, but now they might say we can potentially get in there. And I want to see Maryland put an end to that, put that down. And I do believe that this game is going to be a close one. I think it's going to be back and forth. I want to predict the Terps win, but I just feel weird about this game. Just the place where Nebraska's been at, how they've been playing. Can't confidently say that I feel like Maryland is going to win this game. I just can't say that. There's a reason Nebraska's favored. They've been playing really well. I do want to emphasize, I think Maryland's more talented. I just think that Nebraska at home could be an interesting type of team for the Terps to be able to play. But this game's a huge game for both teams. Maryland, do you want to stay in the top 25? Because another week of going one-on-one, you might drop out of the top 25. I think that's another part of this game that people are going to talk about is Maryland and the chance to go stay in the top 25 and really solidify themselves as a top 25 team. Because, of course, they have another game on Sunday that I feel pretty good about against Iowa, an Iowa team that's been pretty awful so far this year. So you want to go 2-0 in this little week. You want to win tonight against Nebraska, and if you don't, you really need to win against Iowa. But of course, Nebraska 16-8, Maryland 18-6. It'll be interesting to see how things go. Can Nebraska get a game back? Can they get another game for their tournament resume? Because you got to look at it. Maryland's a good quality quad one win now. Like teams really want this win. It's not like last year where it's like, oh, it's Maryland. Like they're not that good. They're not a quad one team. Like this year, we're a quad one team. So you know Nebraska is really going to put their all into winning this game. And I think it's going to be weird. I think Maryland's going to have the chance to sweep, but I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be back and forth. I think it'll be a lower scoring game potentially, but I think that'll be interesting. Let's get into the actual matchups of the game. Who does Maryland need to stop? Who needs to play well? We'll talk about that next. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the ongoing tip or want to bet on fourth quarter comebacks, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into the same game parlay. I love using FanDuel live betting features because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never really like a missed chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So I want to talk about some key matchups going into this game because I think there are some keys to this game. And I think there's some interesting parts about Nebraska basketball that I want to talk about. I think when you talk about Nebraska basketball, you got to start with Bryce Williams. Kid's a stud. Kid arguably might be the best player on the court, the guard for Nebraska. Like he's one of the best players in the Big Ten. He might be a first-team All Big Ten selection. I don't know exactly how it'll go down, but he's that type of player, one of the better players in the country. And I've got to watch him a couple times this year. Of course, when we played him the first time when Maryland played Nebraska, but I've watched a couple Nebraska games, nothing like crazy. But I watched a good bit of college basketball, and I saw Bryce Williams play, and he's a really good player. He's kind of who they rely on. He's their guy. And outside of him, I don't think the team is amazing. I don't think the team is great. I think the team kind of reminds me of what Maryland was last year. Not as bad, but in terms of, I think they're kind of like, okay, outside of Jameer Young and compare Jameer Young to Bryce Williams, it's like there's not a ton of guys that can create their own shot, that can do things for themselves. But you have Bryce Williams, so when teams let him go off or let him go have a really big game, it's really tough to win. He's averaging nearly 20 points per game, and he's their guy. And who's ever guarding him, whether it's Rodney, Miguel, Gillespie, whatever guard is guarding Williams, you're going to have to play him at a high level because when you look at things and when you look at Nebraska when they win games, it's because he goes off. Against Ohio State, he has 24, and that's the game they just won. Against Washington on the road when they won by 14 points, he had 23. Let's see what he had against Oregon. Oregon, when they won by 6, he had 28. So you guys get the theme. In his 4-game streak, he's had about 22 points every single game. And against Illinois, when they beat Illinois, a team Illinois that's been pretty good this year, guess how many he had? 27. He plays nearly every single minute of the game. He doesn't come out very much. And this is what I kind of am at with him. He's probably going to get his. Like I talk about a lot. Some guys are just going to get theirs. That's just what it is. But he can't go for 25. You got to keep him under 22, I want to say, and I think you'll have a pretty good shot. As well as we know this year, Maryland has 5 guys offensively that can score the ball. Everyone in the starting line can score the ball. I want him to have to play defense because you want him to have to guard and be able to use some of that energy up on defense so he doesn't have as much of it on offense. But he's their heartbeat. He's their team. He shoots 35% from 3, 90% from the free throw line. He's a mid-range guy. Like, he can get it done. He's by far their best player, and I think that's one of the biggest key and the biggest matchups that Maryland's going to be looking at. And then Connor Segan, I think it's interesting for Nebraska. You can't let him get going from the 3-point arc. He shoots 40% from 3. And if you guys remember this kid, actually a guy that was looking at Maryland. And to be completely frank and to be completely honest, that would have been a really good player for us to have off the bench. That might have been a perfect type of player for Maryland basketball to have off the bench as Connor Segan. But, of course, we don't have to talk about that too much because he's on the Nebraska team. And I think that's a big part of this game is Connor Segan. When he shoots the 3 ball well, that can keep them in the game. That can win them the game. And if you can limit that, we know he's the shooter. We know he's their guy in terms of shooting the ball. You got to be able to get out to him. And if you can limit it, I feel pretty good about the Terps being able to beat Nebraska overall. And then I want to talk about our first matchup against Nebraska. Like I said, a lower scoring game, 66-69, not like insanely low scoring, but definitely a low scoring game. And that's kind of where I'm at with this Nebraska team. I'm not convinced about them offensively. I'm just not. They've had a lot of games where they haven't scored a ton of points, but they're still able to stay in the game or win games. But especially earlier on in the season, they really struggled to score at times just because I think that you got to say this. There's not a ton outside of Bryce Williams. And if you force other guys to beat, then you're beat. For other guys to beat you, you're going to be put at a good spot for the Terps. And look at our first matchup. Bryce Williams only had 14 points, and we won by 3. Like, that's the difference. He's going to get probably at least 18, probably 20. We really want him to go crazy. Our first matchup, Jacoby Gillespie, it was a guards game. Gillespie, Rodney Rice played really well. Derek didn't have his best game. That leads me to my next point. Derek was actually better than he was in the first matchup. Points. Didn't shoot the ball well. Didn't do much in the first game. But the guards played really well. And if they're going to not allow our bigs to get going, Julian Reese only had 8 points, 3 points for Derek Queen, 11 points combined. But Gillespie had 22, Miguel had 13, and Rodney Rice had 15. So I think that the guard play is going to be really important because I think they're better defensively against the bigs as well as they're going to double the big some. But the guards, they're going to force our guards to play and create shots. And I feel pretty good about that. But you're going to have to do that at a high level. Then I want to touch on the bench because I feel like I've been talking about the bench every single time. It hasn't been good. There's no other way to put it, in my opinion. It's just not that good. There's not like a ton of production off of it. There's not a ton of guys we feel really good about coming off the bench that can play it. Like there's just not a lot going on the bench for the Terps. And so basically, to me, where I'm at is that we need a little something. On the road, a Nebraska team, like I said in the first segment, they're hot. They're ready to go. They're excited. This is a big potential win for them, a potential resume builder for Nebraska. You got to find a way to get some bench production, whether it's I don't feel great about Deshaun Harris-Smith offensively, but maybe Gapari can get going. Maybe Young can make a shot or two. I know Malachi Palmer probably won't play, but you never know. You got to get something going off the bench because Nebraska, their starting five is really relying on a couple of guys to score, but they do get some bench scoring a little bit more than us. So I do think that I don't want to see their benches outplay us completely. And I'll be interested to see, can Maryland's bench do anything? We haven't had to use it this year, and but there's gonna be a game where 4 of the 5 or 3 of the 5 starters aren't playing well, and we're probably going to need Tafar Kapari to have 10 points or Deshaun to hit a big 3, something like that. That hasn't happened, but it's something that I think is important. Where Maryland basketball stands in the Big Ten before this coming week. What can the Terps do to put themselves in a better spot? We'll talk about that next. Let's talk about the Big Ten basketball standings. They're at a really interesting spot right now. And Maryland basketball is sitting in an overall good spot. I wouldn't say we're sitting in a great spot to be able to win the conference, but I think we're sitting in a pretty good spot. We have a chance to move to 9-5 on the year. I don't see us winning the conference. Here's the thing: Michigan and Purdue and Michigan State are all the top 3. You get to play 2 or 3 of those. So you already played Purdue. But Michigan's 11-2 in conference. Michigan State's 10-3. You get to play both of those teams. And so if you go 2-0 this week, you move yourself to 10-5, which could put yourselves in better position to get. It's going to be really tough to win it, but just in better position to compete for the Big Ten title. If you keep kind of teetering around 8-5 and you win a game, but then you drop one, and you win 2, but then you drop one, like you're not going to be able to win the conference this year. Michigan, Purdue, and Michigan State really is the 3-man battle. Wisconsin, UCLA, and Maryland are all just right behind them. But right now, Michigan only has 2 losses in conference. Michigan State only has 3. But like I said, we get Michigan in a couple of weeks, and we get Michigan State in a couple of weeks. So it could be a situation where if Maryland does something really cool and something that's probably not super likely for us to beat both of them, then you could win this conference. Like, it's still up for grabs. You need help. Like, Purdue still has to lose a couple games and stuff, but I do think it could get interesting down the stretch. I think for Maryland, the main thing is you just want to be able to have a good seeding for the Big Ten tournament, because that's going to be really exciting. The Big Ten tournament this year is going to be a really big part of it. I think there's a lot of good teams in the Big Ten this year. I think that there's not like a bunch of like top 5 teams or teams that you'd be like, yeah, that team's a favorite to win a national championship. But I think when you go down the list, like Oregon's like near the bottom of the conference. I think they're a pretty good team. Indiana, I think they're talented. They haven't figured it out. Like there's good teams near the bottom, like Nebraska. We just talked about Ohio State's middle pack. Like they're pretty good. Illinois, like this is going to be a tough Big Ten tournament to win, because I don't think there's far and away a better team. I think Michigan, Michigan State, I think, those two teams are good, and Purdue, but I don't think they're far away better than Maryland is. So I think Maryland has every opportunity to win the Big Ten. Or win the Big Ten tournament. I think Maryland kind of ruined their opportunity of winning the Big Ten because of some of the bad losses we took. Like, imagine where we would be right now. Like, pretty much every loss you could be like Maryland could have won, but imagine if we didn't sell. What was it? We were up by like 8 points against Ohio State. I felt like pretty late in that game. Imagine if we didn't sell that Ohio State game. Imagine earlier on in the season, we didn't lose that horrible loss to Washington, a team that we're so much better than. That's 2 wins right there. I'll keep the other losses the same, but you could argue a couple other ones that easily could have been Maryland wins or should have been Maryland wins. That's 2 wins right there. That's 10 wins, and that's only 3 losses, and that puts you right with the big dog. So Maryland kind of sold their opportunity, I think, to win the conference. But like I said, they might get an opportunity because they still get Michigan and Michigan State, which could get really interesting. So we'll see exactly what happens. That's all we have for today. Thank you guys for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you guys for listening to Locked on Terps.